Hi, my name is Phil. I like talking about politics, and the winner for the poll for today's main video is about how Nigel Farage betrayed the UK for profit. There's another video going to be coming out later on today in terms of the events of the day as well. Now, in terms of Nigel Farage's little dealings on referendum night, something very odd happened that night in June 2016. It was discussed at length, very shortly afterwards, in fact, theories put forward. But last year, Bloomberg reported on an expose of financial double dealings by hedge fund operators with a little help from Nigel Farage. However, it seems to have come to prominence again. I think it's because Bloomberg have received released a video on YouTube which goes through the story again, but with interviews with the journalists who broke it. And a lot of people have been prompting me to say something about it. So here's what's happened, as well as potentially a little bit of interesting information about what may come of it. So on that night in June 2016, the pound lost a huge amount of its value. In financial parlance, it crashed. And it was quite historic as well, the amount. An absolute disaster for the economy, of course. Now, we've heard of the pound crashing before, but nothing on this scale without headline reporting in the media. They don't happen very often, and they do cause widespread problems, so that makes it newsworthy. Of course, it may have missed many people by because the very media that argued for Brexit were hardly going to draw attention to the financial disaster that followed the referendum result. Now, the value of the pound was always going to drop in the event of a Leave win because despite what Brexiteers say, leaving the EU is an economic disaster for us. Our currency wouldn't be seen as a good bet and was always going to be devalued. And the reason has become clear since, with so many companies leaving the UK and setting up in either the EU or in countries that have a free trade deal with the EU. However, something odd happened. The value of the pound had already been a bit unstable in the lead up, as the polls were suggesting that the result was going to be close. But it did also indicate a tight Remain win, and so the damage was limited. But on the evening of the referendum, the value of the pound increased a lot. And it did this twice at two key points in the night. And then the next day, when the results were actually officially announced, it crashed as investors rushed to abandon the pound. So how do you make money from this? And how was Nigel Farage involved? Well, the most profitable way of benefiting from insider knowledge on the value of shares is what's called short selling. It's a form of disaster capitalism, really, where you borrow shares from a bank. In this case, shares in pound sterling. You pay a fee for it, of course. Then what you need to do is to have the value of those shares go up as high as possible. So how can you make the value of the pound suddenly shoot up? Well, despite what many Leave campaigners were saying, any form of Brexit was going to be bad for our economy. The fact that polling was even indicating a close result meant that people had already been hesitant about the pound in the lead up. But if Remain won, then everyone would breathe a sigh of relief, the economy would be saved, and investment would come back in, driving the price of the pound up. So what you do is you tell people that Remain has won, and the value goes up. And this is exactly what happened. Twice before the results had been even counted, Nigel Farage conceded the result and said Remain had looked to have won it. And each time he made this statement, the value of the pound went up instantly. It exactly coincided. Now, anyone with these shares who knew that the value was going to plummet soon could sell them for a good profit. And that's what several groups did. After all, you wouldn't sell them before the Remain result was officially announced because it's going to go up even higher then. There's only one reason for dumping a load of their shares at a time like that, and that's because you know it's peaked. But hang on a minute. If they only borrowed the shares, they can't sell them. They don't belong to them. Not to worry. Short selling has a cunning plan for that. So the idea is, once you've sold the shares for maximum returns, you basically wait for the value to drop. This is why it's essential that the value drops. And then you buy them back cheaply. You can then return them to their rightful owners and you've pocketed the profits. But for this to work, it's not enough to simply engineer an artificial high in the value of the shares. You also have to know that the value will plummet before you have to return those shares, either by design or through insider knowledge, both of which can be illegal. And it's the second in this case. Nigel Farage, or the people telling him to concede the result, had to know that Leave had won because that would crash the pound. The hedge fund managers, it's alleged, were working closely with the pollsters at polling stations and were confident that it had, investing with knowledge that was not publicly available. But Nigel Farage denied short selling, even joking that he wished he had done. But the question, therefore, should be asked, on what basis was he conceding the result then? He said it looked like Remain had won. Now, how did he know if he didn't have insider knowledge from the polling companies? Was he going around every polling station in the country and asking? No, because he was talking crap in studios apart from anything else. But if he didn't have insider knowledge, then that meant that he was making stuff up when he was saying that the result was as it was. Now, that does have the air of plausibility. He is a modern day Baron Munchausen. But what would his motivation for doing so be? What political advantage is there in saying the other side won when no results have been revealed? There isn't one. The polls had closed, and so there was no way to influence the public vote anymore. So there was no political reason to want to declare a result only a few hours before it would be anyway. The motivation was financial. There is the fact that all the hedge funds basically connected with him made a lot of money on that night, and then the value of the pound jumped twice, again, exactly coinciding with his statements. The links are crystal clear. But as it happens, Nigel Farage did claim inside knowledge. He didn't even try to deny that. When Nigel Farage gave his second statement that Remain had won, he said, and I quote, "What I know from some of my friends in the financial markets who have done some big polling." So he said that he was in contact with people in the city who made a killing that night. He also alluded to polling that had been done that they had access to. But this is polling information being given to financial operators, but not the general public. In other words, they were working together with the aim being to influence financial markets. So he basically said in his statement that the law was being broken as far as many people would understand it anyway. Farage later said that the only poll results he'd seen were from a group called Concession. But Concesion's polling results indicated a Leave win. So he either knew Leave was going to win and lied about the result, or he lied about the poll he'd seen. It is literally one of those two things. He's lied about something. Another aspect of illegality: you are not allowed to publish exit poll information before 10 p.m. on the night of a vote in the UK. Nigel Farage made his first statement and citing polling information before then. The Bloomberg investigation had suggested that the legal definition of publish has never actually been tested in court, so we can't be certain. The hedge fund operators have argued that by the pollsters giving them the information on a private basis doesn't constitute publishing them. Okay, maybe. But then surely you run into the issues of insider knowledge affecting financial markets. Besides, Nigel Farage said that polling information indicated a Remain win on national television. That's not giving information to just a few select people, if indeed that was somehow legal. And I don't think the fact that he was giving false information makes it any better. Frankly, illegal activity has already been proven in both Leave campaigns anyway, and then it's fairly clear on the night itself, with all the same players involved. And I do not know how there hasn't been a high-profile investigation and prosecutions for all this. Oh wait, yes I do. That's because Conservative Party donors and members were involved, and the right-wing media hasn't put pressure on the government to do something about it because they're involved too. And for those who believed the Brexiteers who campaigned for Leave, ask yourself a question. Why is it that every single prominent figure in the Leave campaign was a city trader? Every single one of them generates their wealth from trading on the financial markets. For example, one group called Odie Asset Management, run by a Conservative Party donor, made $300 million that night. And that was just one group. And when you try to counter what's in it for them to lie about Brexit, hundreds of millions of pounds profit was made in that one referendum night by those hedge fund operators. That was what was in it for them. And there's more money to be made if we crash out of the EU without a deal. There's plenty more for the vultures. And this also explains why the government didn't push for public inquiries into the criminal investigations and convictions of the referendum campaign. It was won and carried out by people who donate to their party. So you had an illegal alliance between polling companies and hedge fund managers. In fact, the polling companies were going to feed the hedge fund managers information that they weren't relaying to the public. Now, if they're going to do that anyway, that means obviously they're in on the scam. You even wonder if maybe that's not the extent of what they did. Maybe they artificially massaged the results of polls in the lead up as well as just passing information along on the day in order to maximise the size of the crash. There should also be an investigation as to whether there was a conflict of interest in the polling companies, because the irony is that the seemingly inaccurate polling is used by Brexit supporters as evidence why we shouldn't take any poll seriously. But those same polling companies were working for the disaster capitalist cause. Now, just as a little aside before the end, I have to shake my head at the lack of official investigations into Nigel Farage and those hedge fund managers that made out like bandits that night, at least in this country. But there's hope across the pond. Remember, there was an awful lot of players who were key figures in not only the Brexit campaign, but the US presidential campaign as well. And those irregularities are being investigated in the States. We've now started to see some of the players getting some prison food in the United States, and Nigel Farage has been mentioned on more than one occasion as a person of interest to the FBI. So there is a chance that hopefully before long, Mr. Farage is invited to attend a little meeting with the FBI at some point. It's only a shame that the investigations into the full scale of the deception in both the UK and the US won't be completed until well after the damage is done. But for me, the worst part about it is that we won't even be able to blame these guys because none of it was really secret. Their criminal behaviour has been reported to the wider public in plenty of time to avert disaster. We just refuse to listen. So anyway, that is what happened. That's the situation we have now. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe for further content, click the bell notification as well. And until next time, I'll see you later.